Autobiography of John Hope Franklin, the 20th century fight for civil rights, told in first person, singular, by a preeminent American historian. John Hope Franklin lived through America's most defining 20th century transformation, the dismantling of legally protected racial segregation. A renowned scholar, he has explored that transformation in its myriad aspects, notably in his 3.5 million copy bestseller, From Slavery to Freedom. And he was and remains an active participant. Born in 1915, he, like every other African American, could not help but participate. He was evicted from whites-only train cars, confined to segregated schools, threatened once with lynching, and consistently subjected to racism's denigration of his humanity. Yet he managed to receive a PhD from Harvard because become the first black historian to assume a full professorship at a white institution, Brooklyn College, and be appointed chair of the University of Chicago's History Department and later John B. Duke Professor at Duke University. He has reshaped the way African American history is understood and taught and has become one of the world's most celebrated historians, garnering over 130 honorary degrees. But Franklin's participation was much more fundamental than that. From his effort in 1934 to hand President Franklin Roosevelt a petition calling for action in response to the Gordy-Cheek lynching, to his 1997 appointment by President Clinton to head the President's Initiative on Race, and continuing to the present, Franklin has influenced with determination and dignity the nation's racial conscience, whether aiding Thurgood Marshall's preparation for arguing Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, marching to Montgomery, Alabama in 1965, or testifying against Robert Borgen's nomination to the Supreme Court in 1987. Franklin has pushed the national conversation on race toward humanity and equality, a lifelong effort that earned him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, in 1995. Intimate, at times revelatory, Mirror to America chronicles Franklin's life and this nation's racial transformation in the 20th century, and is a powerful reminder of the extent to which the problem of America remains the problem of color. Acknowledgements. Unfortunately, I kept no record of my life until I was a tenured professor and chair of the department at Brooklyn College. By that time, my secretary, the first one I ever had, preserved records of my activities for the Board of Higher Education of the City of New York, and I was a beneficiary. For the earlier period of my life, I have had to do a great deal of research, especially for my childhood and youth. Indeed, I was compelled to reconstruct my childhood to the extent possible, not only from my own memory, but also from the unpublished census scheduled for 1920 and 1930, and with the assistance of the few childhood friends I could locate. Clinton Robinson and Jeffrey Price refreshed my memory of Rentinsville, while Kenny Booker, Stella Batson, and Goldie Williams helped me with the Tulsa years. Walter Hill of the National Archives not only facilitated my use of materials there, but also assisted me in securing State Department files as well as the files on me at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The most that I learned at the later institution was that in the files I was frequently confused with another John Franklin, about whom I knew nothing. James H. Billington, and the director of the Office of Scholarly Programs, Professor Gifford, led the way for their gifted and experienced colleagues to facilitate my work and that of my research assistant, Rashad Jones, who was provided by the library. The fact that this is a John W. Club book bespeaks the immense generosity of the library in facilitating the work on this book at every stage, especially when I was a Kluge Senior Fellow at the library. In doing the research for and writing this book, I have benefited from the assistance of many scholars and members of the staffs of several institutions. Among them were the New York Public Library and the libraries at Fisk University, Howard University, Atlanta University, Emory University, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Duke University, and the University of North Carolina, to which I am deeply grateful. Although I learned much from reading biographies and other relevant material, I learned even more, perhaps, from conversations with such masterful biographers as Arnold Ramspersad of Stanford University, David Levering of New York University, and my Duke University colleague, William H. Schaaf. From time to time, I have consulted various friends and colleagues whose suggestions and observations I greatly valued. Among them are Walter M. Brown, Sheila Fleming, Patricia Sullivan, and Barry Carl. Among the research assistants who have been most helpful and accommodating were Richard B. Fulk and Lauren Schreiniger when they were my students at the University of Chicago. Alfred Moss, also my student at the University of Chicago, now at the University of Maryland, was in addition to being my co-author for three editions of From Slavery to Freedom, generous in offering wise suggestions for organizing and writing this book. Indeed, I learned so much from these and my many other students in the various places I have taught that I am pleased to dedicate this book to all of them. At the 6 colleges and universities where I was a member of the faculty and the 8 where I was a visitor, my colleagues contributed in many ways to my intellectual growth as well as to my understanding of the world, and for that I am grateful. For several years, Terry Sanford, former governor of North Carolina and president of Duke University, and I had lunch once a month, ostensibly to solve the race problem, and I profited greatly from the insights he shared with me. Margaret Fitzsimmons, my secretary for more than 30 years, put order in my life, as well as in the records she kept. Subsequent valuable assistants were Nashani Fraser, Debbie Hamlin, and Charity Green, all of whom had much to do with collecting materials and preparing the manuscript and seeing it through the press. Thomas Lebine, my editor in Varastras and Garros, and his colleagues have been thoughtful and generous in their advice and assistance, for which I am deeply grateful. After Aurelia died, I found a cake of notes and letters from me to her, many written while I traveled in the United States or abroad. These missives have been most helpful in my attempt to recount and evaluate my experiences. I even found letters to me, carefully written by her but never presented, that helped me recall and recount mutual experience that I have used in this work. As in all things that I have attempted to do, she has been of inestimable help, for which I shall be ever grateful. Chapter 1. No Crystal Stair. Living in a world restricted by laws defining race, as well as creating obstacles, disadvantages, and even superstitions regarding race, challenged by capacities for survival. For 90 years, I have witnessed countless men and women likewise meet this challenge. Some detested it, some did not. Many had to settle for any accommodation they could. I became a student and eventually a scholar, and it was armed with the tools of scholarship that I strove to dismantle those laws, level those obstacles and disadvantages, and replace superstitions with humane dignity. Along with much else, the habits of scholarship granted me something many of my similarly striving contemporaries did not have. I knew, or should I say know, what we are up against. Slavery was a principal centerpiece of the New World Order that set standards of conduct, including complicated patterns of relationships. These lasted not merely until emancipation, but after Reconstruction and on into the 20th century. Many of them were still very much in place when beginning in the late 1950s. The sit-ins, marches, and the Black Revolution began a successful onslaught on some of the antediluvian practices that had become a part of the very fabric of society in the New World and American society in particular. Born in 1915, I grew up in a racial climate that was stifling to my senses and damaging to my emotional health and social well-being. Society at that time presented a challenge to the strongest adult, and to a child it was not merely difficult but cruel. I watched my mother and father, who surely numbered among the former, daily meet that challenge. I and my 3 siblings felt equally that cruelty, and it was no more possible to escape that environment of racist barbarism than one today can escape the industrial gases that pollute the atmosphere. The climate touched me at every stage of my life. I was forcibly removed from a train at age 6 for having accidentally taken a seat in the white people's coach. I was the unhappy victim, also at age 6, of a race riot that kept the family divided for more than 4 years. I endured the very strict segregation laws and practices in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was rejected as a guide through busy downtown Tulsa traffic by a blind white woman when she discovered that the 12-year-old at her side was black. I underwent the harrowing experiences as a 16-year-old college freshman of being denounced in the most insulting terms for having the temerity to suggest to a white ticket seller a convenient way to make change. More harrowing yet was the crowd of rural white men who confronted and then nominated me as a possible Mississippi lynching victim when I was 19. I refused service while on a date as a Harvard University graduate student at age 21. I was refused service. Racism in the Navy turned my effort to volunteer during World War II into a demeaning embarrassment, such that at a time when the United States was ostensibly fighting for the 4 freedoms, I struggled to evade the draft. I was called a Harvard nigger. I was called a Harvard nigger at age 40. At age 45, because of race, New York banks denied me a loan to purchase a home. At age 60, I was ordered to serve as a porter for a white person in a New York hotel. At age 80, to hang up a white guest's coat at a Washington club where I was not an employee but a member. To these everyday, ordinary experiences during 90 years in the American race jungle should be added the problem of trying to live in a community where the economic and social odds clearly placed any descended Africans at an advantage, at a disadvantage. For a profession, my father, Buck Franklin, proudly chose the practice of law, depending as it did on the judicial system in which it operated. The practice of law in America could not possibly have functioned favorably or even fairly for a person who was qualified as, at best, a pariah within it. My father However, the optimists persisted in holding the view that the practice of law was a noble pursuit whose nobility entailed the privilege of working to rectify a system that contained a set of advantages for white people and a corresponding set of disadvantages for black people. The integrity and the high moral standards by which he lived and that he commended to his children forbade him to violate the law or resort to any form of unethical conduct. And as children, we had to adjust ourselves to dignified, abject poverty. My mother, Molly, shared these views, to which she added a remarkable amount of creativity and resourcefulness in her effort to supplement the family income and boost the family morale. She taught in public schools, made hats, and developed a line of beauty aids. To these creative skills should be added her equanimity, her sense of fairness, her high standards of performance, and her will to succeed. On many occasions she would say to me, "If you do your best, the angels cannot do any better." These qualities became the hallmark of her relationship with her 4 children, giving us the strength and skills to cope with the formidable odds she knew we would encounter. If we did not always succeed, it was not the fault of our parents, but the challenges I, my brother Buck, and my sisters Marcella and Ann faced were always formidable. Living through years of remarkable change, the barrier of race was a constant. With the appearance of each new institution or industry, racism would rear its ugly head again. When the age of the automobile made its debut, there was the question of whether African Americans should be given the opportunity to acquire the skills necessary to find work within that industry. It was the same with the advent of the computer age. More than one company dragged its feet when it came to making certain that young people on both sides of the track had an opportunity to acquire the skills necessary to be successful participants in the new scientific revolution. Indeed, the expansion of numerous American studies caused debates or at least discussions regarding the abilities of African Americans to cope with the new developments, whatever they were. Even at the end of the 20th century, many Americans continued to debate 19th century theories that were racial regarding the abilities of blacks to see at night, to make accurate calculations, and to learn foreign languages. These debates ranged from discussions having to do with the effect of African Americans on the growth of the gross national product to their ability to resist new diseases or their capacity to adjust to new educational or cultural developments. Throughout a life spent at the intersection of scholarship and public service, I have been painfully aware that superstitions and quaint notions of biological and even moral deficiencies between blacks and whites continue to affect race relations in the United States, even into the 21st century.